Good morning, I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and Asianaviation.com. Today we are in conversation with Vivian Quenet, Managing Director for Asia-Pacific at Arianespace. Vivian, welcome to In Conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me this morning.
Last few years, space has become a super hot topic. We've got billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk getting into the launch business, manned and unmanned. Boeing recently started back up in the manned space business. Northrop Grumman's been around for a long time. Give us an idea, kind of give us the big picture of where Arianespace fits into this ecosystem and a little sort of a 50-cent history of the company.
Sure. So you're completely right. So space has become cool again. There's a lot of people coming in, a lot of interesting projects in space now. So where Arianespace stands, I think what's important is maybe to go back a bit in history. So Arianespace was created to provide European and independent access to space. So that's how it started. And then we continued and we became the first commercial company to provide access to space to private company. And we've been doing that for the last 40 years.
Asia-Pacific in particular has been a hot spot. India's launched some satellite missions. I think they've got one to Mars, I believe. New Zealand actually is getting into the sort of the CubeSat launch business. Australia, you've got several companies there that have been getting into it. They're spending big on their programs. Was looking at your website and the information on the company. I guess, was it last year, 89 satellites, 17 Asia-Pacific operators, 10 countries, and 5 satellites so far this year for Japan, India, South Korea, and others. What is sort of your customer profile, and what are customers looking for, and why would they choose Arianespace over someone else?
Yeah. So if you look at over the last 40 years, we've been launching more than 700, I don't count, 740 satellites so far for more than 100 customers, whether it's institutional customers, so defense, government, agencies, but also private customers. So for a long period of time, we were mainly launching geostationary satellites. But what we do now, as you highlighted, is that space has become much more diverse. So we're still continuing to launch geostationary satellites, but we are also now venturing in small sats. We just launched our SSMS mission, which is a rideshare on the Vega rocket, which was embarking 53 small satellites, or CubeSat, nanosat, microsat. But we also had, beginning of this year, the launch of our first constellation, but the OneWeb constellation. So as you can see, it used to be only GEO, but now we have GEO, we have small sat, observation satellite, we have communication constellation, and so on. So it's very interesting and very diverse now.
So, and again, I'd like to back up. I mean, would you say it's 50-50 commercial defense, or is it more commercial these days?
Well, it depends to whom we are talking. If you're looking at the competitors that you were mentioning before, they are lucky to have a very strong government support, and those guys can account about 70% of their revenue is actually public money, whether it's for defense, whether it's for agency or government. At Arianespace, we have always been more balanced. We used to have actually more on the commercial side, more like 60-40. Now, the institutional tends to be a bit higher because there's been a drop in geostationary orders, not only for us, but for the whole industry. And we used to have 25 commercial geostationary satellite ordered on a yearly base, and that dropped 3 years ago to 4 or 5. Now we are back to this year, I think 18, but that was due to a very specific event in USA with a 5G C-band auction. But yeah, we lost a lot of geo. So now naturally, even for Arianespace, I would say it's more like 50-50.
Okay. And as we talked about at the beginning, there's a lot of companies that are getting into the launch business. Let's talk about the vehicles that everybody's using. Your vehicles right now are basically single use. Is that correct?
That's correct. We call it expendable, but that's
right.
exactly what you said, single use.
Okay. Are you in the process of developing reusable boosters like some of the other companies are?
Yeah. So before I reply to that question, I think what's important to understand is that uh, customers don't knock at our door and say, "Hey, I want a reusable launcher." Reusability is just a mean to reduce the cost. So that's the first thing. I never lost a deal because we were not having a reusable launcher. So that's the first thing. So there are different ways to become more competitive. One way is what our competitors have done, and that's build some reusable first stage. The other way is what we are doing with Ariane 6 and Vega C, is to save on production. And how do you save on production? You save on production by finding synergy. You save on production by streamlining your production. You find savings also by using new methods. So we are now using, or we will be using in the future, 3D printing for our engine. So that's a lot of way to reduce cost. And Ariane 6 is about 40% less expensive to build than an Ariane 5 for pretty much, I wouldn't say the same rocket, but for the same technology. So it's just a different way to become more competitive. Now back to your first question. Yes, we are looking now at reusability. I'm not saying that we are going to go for reusability, because for reusability to be cost effective, you need to have a certain number of launch on a yearly basis. At that time, I think the calculation was about 20 per year. And when we looked at our manifest, we didn't have so many launches. We have about once a month or something like that. So at that time, we thought, okay, that usability also has a cost. You need to have drone ships, you need to refurbish everything. So there is a cost to that. Now, having said that, yes, we are looking at reusability. We are looking at reusability with Ironworks, which is a joint venture between CNES, the French Space Agency, and Ariane Group. And those guys are working on two demonstrators. One is called Callisto. It's actually also in collaboration with JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency. And the other one is called Themis. And what those demonstrators are going to do is, first of all, to master the technology, to be able to land a first stage back. And two, we are going to look and to assess the cost of doing so. So Callisto will be the first, Themis will be the second one, and Themis will be equipped with a new engine, a LOX methane engine called Prometheus, and that engine has two attributes. The first attribute is that it costs 1/10 of what the current Vulcan cryogenic engine is costing us. So that's, no matter what, whether we use it or reuse it, it's going to cost 1/10 of the current cost. The second thing is that the Prometheus is meant to be reusable. So once we have that in place, we will be able to assess and look at our business model, at our manifest, at our customer, and see if it makes sense.
Okay. You mentioned this just a little bit ago, and I want to kind of combine two questions into one because they follow on with each other. You talked about that the geostationary market is declined a little bit. We're seeing lots of CubeSats, small sats, nanosats, pick your acronym du jour, whatever you want to call it, for things like broadband internet, aviation, all of those kinds of things. So is that a trend that you will see continue? And the second part of this is, and I actually read a story this morning about, I think there's a old Russian booster and another old Russian satellite or something that are on a collision course. China did a demonstration a few years ago where they did an anti-sat mission and destroyed one of their old satellites. The U.S. has demonstrated that again, and so talk to me about the garbage in space, because when we're launching, with OneWeb, with the dozens and dozens of small satellites that it's going to have up, once it gets out of bankruptcy, I think, space, actually, when you're talking about low Earth orbit or even geostationary orbit, I mean, there's a lot of material up there. Is it getting too crowded?
Well, there's two questions here. So first of all, about the trend of CubeSat. So it's true that CubeSat has been very successful, and there's a few reasons for that. There is miniaturization, so things are getting smaller and cheaper. a lot of people are using out-of-the-shelf technology that they integrate into CubeSat, and that makes space accessible to people that could not in the past. So we have a lot of startups, we have a lot of universities, young company, young smart guys who say, oh, finally I can have access to space because it's cheaper to build, but it's also cheaper to launch. Now, will that replace the geostationary satellite? I think it depends on what kind of application you are talking about. If you're talking about communication, I think CubeSat will always have a power issue. To communicate and to have a large footprint, to have a lot of power, to have a lot of capacity for communication, you need power. And CubeSat doesn't have that power. But now if you're looking at observation satellite, yes, there's a few things that you can do with CubeSat to observe the Earth with CubeSat constellation, which may replace some of the observation satellite. Now, to your second question, which is about space debris, you're absolutely right. There is a big issue now because, first of all, CubeSats are not regulated. Unlike a geostationary satellite where everybody has an orbital slot, CubeSat doesn't have that. So you basically can launch your CubeSat wherever, whenever in space. And that's one problem. So it's a lot of them. The second issue is that those CubeSats don't have any propulsion. So that means that they cannot make maneuver, they cannot avoid another satellite. And that's why you saw, like, I think it was 3 weeks ago, where the ISS, which is a monster, if I may say, so it's a big, big satellite, had to maneuver to avoid, in that case, it was not a CubeSat, actually, it was I think it was a Japanese rocket debris, but still, so we need to find a way that this doesn't happen. We need to find a way to regulate space and to make sure that we don't have so many CubeSats floating as a debris, that we can manage and control and monitor those CubeSats. So I think the first thing that needs to be implemented is a space law. So we, in France, we have a space law called Loi sur l'espace, which Ariane 6 and Vega C are going to be fully compliant. And what does it mean in concrete? It means that, for instance, when we're going to launch an Ariane 6, the second stage will be pushed after the launch into a graveyard orbit where it's not disturbing anybody. And other components are going to be pushed back in the atmosphere to burn, so that we don't leave any debris, or we leave very few debris in space. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, you kind of touched on it. I was just wondering, and I'm not an engineer or anything like that. It was interesting to me. You mentioned that the CubeSats are not powered, so once they're up, you really have little control over them. But is there any way to make them sort of self-terminate?
Well, the issue, if they self-terminate, depending on how you do it.
I mean, if they go up for a limited mission.
Yeah. One of the issue with CubeSat also in the application is that the life of a CubeSat is about limited to 2 or 3 years, something like that. So self-terminate, yeah, but if you make it explode, then you're just creating more debris.
Well, like bring it down and into the atmosphere.
Well, that's one of the things. I think maybe if there is a regulation put in place, there should be something requiring that those CubeSats should be burned back into the atmosphere.
Okay.
But again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not. But there needs to be something like that to be done. Otherwise, what everybody is fearing is what is called the Kessler syndrome, and the Kessler syndrome is cascading collision effect, where one CubeSat or one debris hits another one, which therefore splits in 2 or 3 parts, which is another one and another one, and that would make access to space impossible for generation. And if we have no access to space, then we have a big issue, because we rely so much on space for GPS, for meteorological forecast, especially with climate change now. We need to be monitoring even more the Earth than we use in the past. So that's a big issue.
I had my own story with GPS. We rented a house in Normandy one summer, and some friends of ours were using GPS in French. They're both French, a very nice French couple. And they ended up, the GPS told them, à droite, and so they turned, and they ended up in somebody's field with the cows looking at them. So we know how GPS works sometimes. Again, I was looking back at your website, and tell me if this number is correct. Arianespace has about 220 people, full-time employees. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the exact number. I don't know exactly, but yeah, it's about that.
I mean, I would have thought you would have 10,000 employees. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, so basically it's an ecosystem. So there is, I would say, three parties there. You have the European space agencies and the agencies like CNES, which are developing and funding our launchers, so the Ariane 5 or Ariane 6 or the Vega and Vega C rockets. So they're developing and funding those rockets. Then you have the primes. The primes are those who are building the rockets. So if you're talking about Ariane 5 or Ariane 6, that's the Ariane Group. And here you're absolutely right. Ariane Group is 9,000 people. Of course, they're not doing only the Ariane 5. They're also doing nuclear missile, the M51 for the French defense. But yeah, you're right. So the guys that are building the rocket, they're many more. And actually, Arianespace, we're not building, we're not developing the rocket, we are operating the rocket. So we are the one going to the market, proposing the service. So we're launch service supplier. So we take care of the customer from prospection to until we are putting the satellite into the fairing.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, COVID-19. We've all seen the numbers and all of that. How has that impacted? I mean, I'm covering aviation. All the airlines are shut down for international travel pretty much. Their start of Singapore and Hong Kong just came up and said they were going to open a travel bubble. But how is that affecting your business at all, and how are you guys coping with it?
Yeah, so there's two answers to that. First of all, the commercial answer, how much it has impacted the business. So I can only talk for Asia because I'm responsible for Asia-Pacific, but it's undeniable that business has been affected, especially on the geostationary market. So there hasn't been this year any order in Asia for big geostationary satellites. So that's a fact. And the reason why that has happened is because during COVID, there has been very little appetite for a private investor to inject money into geostationary projects, as simple as that. Now, if you're talking about institutional customers, so we're all here more talking about observation satellite, most of them are programs from agencies, government, and defense. And those guys, they don't have that funding issue because so long as the project is funded, they're going to pursue. So on one hand, we had a big impact on the business for geostationary private companies. On the other hand, the programs for observation satellites are still running. Now, on the technical side, there has been some issues because a lot of the production of the satellite has been delayed, and that has an impact on our manifest, our launch schedule. And ourselves, we had some impact because in March, when France declared a mandatory confinement, we were about to launch our first Vega rideshare, the SSMS, Small Satellite Mission Service, 1 week later or 2 weeks later. So we had to stop the campaign during the 2 months because nobody could go to the spaceport. When operation resumed to the spaceport, then we had another issue because then our customers could not travel anymore to the spaceport because of the travel ban. So that is required for them to prepare the satellite with the batteries, anything related to flight readiness. So as the Greek philosopher Plato say, necessity is the mother of invention. So we had to find something to tackle this travel ban. So what we did is we equipped our engineers with smart connected glasses connected to an encrypted server in-house. And basically, our engineers became the eyes and the hands of our customers, which were located thousands of miles away. So that was, I think, a positive experience, which we're going to continue even without COVID, because actually there's a big demand, especially if you're talking about those customers like CubeSat, they're university startups. They sometimes don't necessarily have the funding to travel all the way to French Guiana. So yeah, I think we made some good progress here.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of aviation companies in the MRO space, and even on acquisitions in private aviation and business jets, where they're doing, or even lease returns, where a lessor, instead of sending someone to do an inspection, they have somebody locally do the inspection and they beam it back to the home office and all of that. So we're seeing some of that in aviation as well. It's interesting to hear that that's going on too in the space business. I want to get back to you. In a 2018 interview, you talked about China. You talked about some orders that they got for Laos and Indonesia. Is China really the country to watch in Asia? I mean, they've been making big moves recently to develop trade ties with Asian neighbors and Central Asia and other countries. Do you think that China can make access to space sort of a key trade item, sort of a carrot for other countries to do business with them?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's undeniable that they are a huge player now. Actually, if you look at the number of launches that have been done last year and the year before, and probably this year, they are the number one worldwide. They are the one launching the most rockets today in space. So that's one thing. Now, if you look at how many commercial satellites are launched versus how many institutional satellites are launched, we're talking about 99% is institutional. So they are launching for China. They're actually not launching many commercial satellites. So yes, here and there are some countries which are signing up. This year they had a launch which actually was a failure for Indonesia. But I think the reason why this is still limited is that most of, let's put it this way, the most competitive satellites today, communication satellites, are still built either in Europe or in US. And those satellites cannot be exported to China to be launched because of ITAR regulation. So that is a big break for them to be able to commercialize launch service for those satellites. Now, we're right, some countries, the neighbors, they can potentially find an agreement, especially the smaller countries that don't necessarily have the technology or don't have the money to buy those big satellites from US and Europe. So they do have a market here, for sure.
I'm curious, I mean, and again, I was reading this story, Laos spent $259 million US on a satellite. Why are they spending that much money on a satellite, or did China pay for that?
Well, that's, I think, some years back. But first of all, on the cost of the satellite, that seems quite reasonable to me, if I may say. But yes, for most of people say, wow, that's a lot of money. But if you look at it, what you should really think is not as a cost, but as an enabler. And the simple fact that you and me, we're working today, and we don't need to have a physical interview because we have all the means, all the communication that are in place today to continue our work despite COVID. If you look at who are the people who have been most hit by the pandemic, for example, they are the people who are the poorest. They are the people who are in agriculture and who cannot go to the market to sell their products anymore because they don't have access to internet, which could potentially have saved and allow them to sell their products online. So I think you have to look at it not as a cost, but really as an enabler to grow further the economy.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah. So now who paid for it? I don't know. This is something I could not say. I know that a lot of countries in China likes to work a lot with offsets. So they would trade, maybe, I'm not sure about this one, but they could trade a satellite launch and the satellite itself against some commodities, some minerals or whatever the Laos has to offer.
Yeah. I was curious, I mean, our time's running a little bit short, so I want to get these last questions in. The Satellite Industry Association said recently that launch services are worth about US $5 to $6 billion a year. Is that about right?
Yeah, I don't have the exact figure, but it doesn't sound unreasonable to me.
Okay, I would have thought that it was more than that, just because, but that tells you how much I know about the economies of space flight and space launches and all that. And again, our time is running short, so I want to ask these last two questions. 2019, Ariane Group signed a deal with the European Space Agency to study a mission to the moon to mine something called regolith, which can be used. You can extract water and oxygen, things like that. Is that still on?
Yeah. So that's still on, and actually we are having our moon mission called Go One. I don't remember the name, but Arianespace, we have a mission. It's a rideshare, and the European Space Agency is going to be one of our passengers. But we are also open other private companies to go to the moon with us in a rideshare. So that's still going on. Regarding the moon itself and what you can do on it, yes, you can extract water and oxygen, and that's why is that important? Because that means that oxygen and water can be transformed into a propellant in space. So that means that moon could potentially become like a gas station, if I may say, to go somewhere further. But there is a lot of mineral on the moon. There's a lot of projects on mining asteroids, because I mean our good old Earth is a bit running out of fuel, or how you want to call it. So there are a lot of projects that could actually help the Earth if we could bring things back from the moon or from some asteroids.
Yeah, it's very interesting as well. And also you touched on my last question, because you're looking at using the moon as a base to go somewhere else. And that means obviously the obvious candidate for that would be Mars. If anyone ever decides to go to Mars, will Arianespace launch the first rocket?
Well, I don't think, as of today, our competitors have already planned to go to Mars, and we don't. So very openly, I think we wouldn't be the first one to do it. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the future. As of today, there is little appetite from the European Space Agency to send astronauts on a European launcher in space, but that may change. So on that one, I cannot really say. But on Mars, we're having a lot of contribution. I mean, the European ecosystem, Airbus, Thales, European Space Agency. There's a lot of collaboration with NASA on their Mars mission. So we are involved in that. It's just that it's not our astronaut, or maybe not our rocket who's going to go there.
Okay. Vivian, last question. I mean, it's been a really tough year. You yourself said that the market's been down a little bit. It's been tough to get people places, things like that. 2021, what's your outlook? Is it going to be a better year, we hope?
Yeah, so I think, as I said, there was little appetite from the investors to invest in those projects, but the projects are still there. So if we see a recovery in 2021, at least in Asia, I would expect that the few projects are going to come back, and some of them have just been delayed. So on the geostationary, I think it should be a good year. On the non-geostationary, so all the observation satellite, there was no real slowdown, just a bit of delay. So that should continue well in 2021.
Great. Vivian Quenet, Managing Director, Asia-Pacific at Arianespace. Thanks for joining me in conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. Have a good day.